Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for our special Brave Girls Virtual Storytime of Lizzie Demands a Seat with author Beth Anderson. My name is Emma Rothberg, and I am the Associate Educator of Digital Learning and Innovation at the National Women's History Museum. A few housekeeping notes. Beth will be answering questions at the end of her reading, and you are welcome to ask your questions at any time during the program using the Q&A function on the toolbar. You may ask your questions at any time during the presentation, but they won't be answered until the end. But Beth is really excited and happy to answer your questions. And with that, I would love to introduce our author today. Beth Anderson, a former educator, has always marveled at the power of books. Driven by curiosity and a love for words, she writes untold tales, hoping to inspire kids to laugh, ponder, and question. She's the award-winning author of Franz's Phantasmagorical Machine, Revolutionary Prudence Wright, Tad Lincoln's Restless Wriggle, Smelly Kelly and His Super Senses, Lizzie Demands a Seat, our book today, An Inconvenient Alphabet, and on November 15th, Cloaked in Courage, Uncovering Deborah Sampson, Patriot Soldier. Beth has more historical picture books on the way, so stay tuned. And please welcome Beth Anderson. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here and thrilled to share Lizzie Demands a Seat with everyone. This was a really special book for me. It was kind of in the beginning of my writing journey. And so I learned a lot about writing and about myself and about history and all sorts of things. It took a really long time. It took many, 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 many revisions. And then finally, it was able to be published. And so adding E.B. Lewis's phenomenal artwork to it just made the story sing. And I love sharing it with kids because it just brings so many things to light that we didn't know. You know, you learn about Rosa Parks, but it's surprising to know that this fight to ride on transportation was going on for 100 years before her. So now I'd like to go ahead and we'll share the book with you, and I will read it, and then I'd love to answer your questions. Lizzie Demands a Seat. Lizzie Jennings was in a hurry, a big hurry, the kind of hurry she couldn't hold back. Lizzie's heels ticked off the seconds. If she didn't catch a streetcar right away, the choir would be without an organist. The New York City heat pressed down as Lizzie and her friend Sarah rushed to the corner. At the sight of the horses approaching, Lizzie's hand shot up. The driver pulled over and the women boarded. But the conductor took one look at them and planted himself in the entrance. "You'll have to wait for the next car." "We can't," said Lizzie. "We're late for church." He pointed. "There's another car coming for your people." His words stung. This wasn't about empty seats. It was about tradition, a tradition of separate streetcars for blacks and whites, a tradition most people ignored. Usually Lizzie's fine clothes and proper manners earned her a seat on a car reserved for whites. Usually it was up to passengers to object, but not today. This conductor expected her to ride on a car for her people, a car with the sign, "Colored people allowed in this car." Lizzie swallowed hard. "I don't have any people." "The car's full." The conductor shooed her away. "Get off." She eyed empty seats. Despite being born a free black in a free state, she'd never been treated as equal. She'd been rejected, restricted, and refused by schools, restaurants, and theaters. Suddenly, late for church wasn't as important as late for equality. Lizzie stood firm. Passengers murmured, horses snorted, pedestrians gathered. Finally, the driver held up the reins. "We need to go." "Aye," replied the conductor. As he turned to the women, his brogue rolled like thunder. "You may go in. But if the passengers raise any objections, you shall go out, or I'll put you out. Lizzie's heart pounded. Her voice broke free. I'm a respectable person, born and raised in this city. She held up a scolding finger. And you are rude to insult a decent person. Get out! The conductor lunged at Sarah and yanked her off the platform. Then he reached for Lizzie. Don't you touch me, she shouted. He seized her arm. Lizzie grabbed the window frame and hung on. He roared at the driver. Fasten your horses. Give me a hand. The two men pried her loose, dragged her across the platform, and dropped her at the curb. But before the driver could snap the horses into action, Lizzie picked herself up and climbed back on the streetcar. The conductor shook with fury. You'll be sorry. He turned to the driver. Go, and don't stop till you see a police officer. The whip cracked, the streetcar lurched, and the horses took off. Lizzie looked back as Sarah faded into the distance. 5 blocks later, the conductor hailed an officer. Again, a crowd gathered and watched in silence. Officer, said the conductor, the passengers object to this woman's presence. It's my duty to remove her. No one objected, Lizzie said, leaping up. I have rights. The officer forced her off the streetcar. Make your complaint. You'll not get far. Within moments, the clippity-clop of horses' hooves faded, and onlookers slipped away. Lizzie stood, catching her breath, while the officer's taunts rang in her ears. She brushed herself off, raised her chin, and straightened her bonnet. Too late and too riled for church, she started home. Footsteps followed. A voice called out, Miss! Startled, she spun around. I saw what happened. Here's my name if you need a witness. Lizzie studied the card and mumbled, Thank you. As she watched him disappear, a flicker of hope sparked. A witness, someone who recognized her rights. Slowly, she calmed the storm swirling in her mind. This wasn't about her. It was about dignity, about justice, ideas she'd been raised on. Her enslaved grandfather had fought alongside patriots in the Revolutionary War. Her parents were abolitionists, raising money, giving speeches, fighting to free Southern slaves. Lizzie had joined the fight for equal rights in the North. She attended meetings. She signed petitions. She became a school teacher determined to educate Black children. But that wasn't enough. Blacks were shut out of the neighborhoods, jobs, and schools. Nearing home, she glanced at her torn skirt. Clothing could be replaced. Her injuries would heal. Still, injustice remained, year after year after year. There was one place where justice for one could mean justice for all, a courtroom. But if she failed to win, she could make it worse. 13 years before, a Black man lost his case for the right to ride. No one had dared try again. Word of Lizzie's treatment at the hands of the conductor spread through the neighborhood, and the meeting was scheduled for the next day. At home, stiff and sore, Lizzie recorded every detail of the incident and prepared a statement. At church, people listened to her words. Elizabeth Lizzie Jennings was a respected school teacher and church organist. White passengers in the car had not objected, and she had a witness. The people had waited long enough. They formed a committee and hired a lawyer. Newspapers printed Lizzie's account. Her father spoke in churches, wrote letters and articles, and appealed for public support. 7 months later, in the chill of winter, Lizzie hurried up the walk to the courthouse. The click of her heels matched her heartbeat as she made her way through the crowd. Stepping into the packed courtroom, Lizzie steeled herself with a silent prayer. She took her seat next to her lawyer, Chester Arthur. The gavel sounded and the case began. Elizabeth Jennings versus the Third Avenue Railroad Company. Arthur described Lizzie's attempt to board the streetcar and the assault by the conductor and the driver. He defended her right to ride. The Third Avenue Railroad Company argued for its right to do what was good for business. Lizzie weighed every word. Finally, the judge reminded the jury to keep in mind the facts as they deliberated. The Third Avenue Railroad Company was responsible for the actions of the driver and the conductor. People of color had the same right to ride as others. Streetcars were required to carry all respectable, well-behaved people. As the jurors filed out, Lizzie studied their faces one by one. The law seemed clear, but Lizzie understood how words could be twisted. Was it respectable to demand her rights? Was it well-behaved to fight back if the jury didn't think so? They could destroy her right to ride. At last, the jury returned. The gavel sounded, and a hush settled over the room. Lizzie's pulse pounded as the judge announced the verdict. Lizzie turned to her lawyer, then took in the crowd, her family, the committee, her friends and neighbors. They had done it. The next day, when the colored people allowed in this car signs on those Third Avenue streetcars came down, Lizzie smiled. She knew it was just one ruling against one streetcar company, but it was a beginning. More people needed to step up onto streetcars to test the verdict. And step up they did. A few days after Lizzie's victory, a woman fought for a seat on the 8th Avenue streetcar. Then it happened again and again. City after city, decade after decade, for a century, fighting for the right to ride. Men and women, young and old, stepped onto streetcars, trains, and buses, inspired by the strength of those who came before them.
Thank you so much for that reading and sharing of Lizzie's story, Beth. That was so wonderful to hear and so inspiring. And just I'm so excited to learn more about Lizzie. So again, we would love if you have your questions to drop them in the Q&A at the bottom of the toolbar. And as people are kind of getting those questions ready, I have a question. So,
Sure.
you know, Lizzie did this in New York. I'm calling you from New York, and I've never heard of Lizzie's story. I was never taught it in schools. So how did you first learn about Lizzie?
Well, I saw a small article on her and some other women from history we should know about, because I didn't know about all of them. And so I was really interested. I'm always exploring ideas for stories. And when I read her story, somehow it just grabbed me differently. And I was just awestruck by this woman's strength. And also, surprised by what I didn't know about history and what I had never thought about, really. It's yeah, like I said in the intro there, the Rosa Parks is a standard person. We know about Rosa Parks. She's taught in schools, and we cherish her legacy, but we don't think about what was going on before then. And I didn't know anything about that time in that place. You know, we have these certain pockets of information in school that we learn, and we'd never really explore all the other little things that are going on. And so, you know, historically it was significant. She was amazing. And as I explored her story, I just loved it, because it showed, you know, that wider platform of all the people involved in establishing social justice, which is all of us, right?
That is such a wonderful way to stumble across the story, is just by, finding a primary source. So thank you for sharing. That kind of leads me to my next question. You spoke about how you hadn't learned about Elizabeth Jennings or Lizzie in school, or taught about Rosa Parks, but not really what came before her. So if you can speculate, why do you think Elizabeth Jennings has been left out of the history books?
Well, I think part of it's race, and she's just not been a major name, you know, even though she had that statement in the newspaper that was shared at the time. I think few people just knew about her because it didn't gain a lot of attention, although it did sort of, you know, her actions kind of flowed across the country because those actions started to repeat in other places. And so it did have a lot of influence, but nobody was really thinking about this person who started it. Although at the time they actually celebrated Elizabeth Jennings Day for some years afterwards. But somehow that faded away too. I don't know why. I think we should bring that back, you know.
That's amazing. I had no idea that was a celebration in New York City.
Yeah. I think it was the day that her victory was, so it would have been February 22nd, which is a day that has other significances too in history.
That is amazing. I never knew. I should write my mayor. Um, so I guess kind of expanding on Lizzie's story and focusing more about, the actual process of writing the book. What was your favorite part of writing the book, Lizzie Demands a Seat?
Well, I think the key piece that let me know that this story would really matter for kids was when I read that there were some classes in New York City public schools that had learned about her. And there were some kids that fought for honoring her with a street sign. And they had gone to the city council meetings, they had petitioned, they had done everything they could do for, I think it was a year or so, and the council didn't approve it and didn't make a street sign for her. But a few years later, which I think is so cool because, you know, it's like her story. People keep picking it up and carrying it forward. Some more kids fought, some fifth and sixth graders, and I forget the name of the school, but they actually were successful. And down in Lower Manhattan, there's the sign. I know you're seeing it backwards, but this is a replica here of Elizabeth Jennings Place. So it's there. And, you know, if that's one of the things that made me love her story even more, that it inspired kids to get active and do something, make changes.
That is amazing. I just did a very quick Google, and I'm going to drop the link in the chat of a short story from the Museum of the City of New York about the naming of Elizabeth Jennings Place. It says it was Public School 361, I think is what I just saw, that pushed for this. But that is so cool. I'll have to go check out Elizabeth Jennings Place.
I stood right there. I was very excited.
That is so cool. It's one of those things that when, you think that history happened in the past, it's not something that you can see or touch or, be around. And then you walk down the streets and you realize, oh no, wait, history happened right here. Like I'm standing here.
And we don't think about it. You know, I didn't get to New York until after I had written the story, but then to stand there and think about, this is close to the place where she boarded that streetcar. And this was happening right here. And then when I went to Brooklyn and went to the courthouse where she went up those steps and I went up those steps, I mean, it gave me goosebumps, and it makes me think that, there is history everywhere. We don't even know it. But when you can learn what happened in a place and then kind of go there and just feel it, it's significant. And I think that, that the sign and everything else that we've been through with the pandemic, I mean, we are actors in history, all of us, every day. Our decisions matter, and that has never been more profound than with the pandemic, I think.
That is such an important message and such an inspiring message. And I mean, I'm getting so excited and enthusiastic that this is a story that I'm learning about with our audience that took place in my hometown. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, this idea that history is all around us and we are a part of history. I mean, it takes courage to kind of
It does.
recognize that. And so I guess that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, how would you define courage? How would Lizzie define courage?
Oh boy, courage can be many different things. I think it's stepping past fear. And she did it. And I think, you can look at those silent bystanders. And I know I've been a silent bystander, and I'm sure many people have been a silent bystander, agonized by that thought of, what do I say? What do I do? And in the moment, not that quick to gather that courage and step up. And so I think this is a story that really helps, pass that hurdle and make you feel okay about stepping up, saying something, whatever way you can. Like the guy who offered to be a witness, he didn't have the courage to do it when it was happening, but he did have the courage to do it right afterwards. So, I mean, courage comes in all shapes and sizes, and we have to do what is wise for us to do too. I mean, we don't want to put ourselves in danger, but we need to speak up. I mean,
Thank
kids
you
have
for
to learn
that.
to be smart about it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Again, I think again that's such an important message for young people is that, there's not one definition of courage, and you can be courageous in many different ways.
Yeah.
I know that it's something that I have to think about too. How am I going to be courageous? Can I be courageous enough to even think about being courageous? So thank you for sharing that. And I guess one last question that I have, if we want to learn more about Lizzie and streetcars, where do we go? Where do we start?
Well, there aren't a lot of books on her. There are a couple of books. There's one by, let me see what's in the back here. In the back of the book, there are a lot of, my bibliography is quite long. I'll show you here. So all of these sources are about something connected to Elizabeth Jennings' story. And there are a lot of primary sources from newspapers of the time. And there's a lot of secondary sources telling about that history. And really, some of those secondary sources really helped me find the heart of her story, because I had to understand the time and the place. And for instance, like the fact that she's a teacher, we all have this, common idea of teachers. But when you learn about the African American movement at the time, and that one of their main focuses was education, then that changes her being a teacher to being an activist. And so we see her kind of in a different light, and we see her actions in a different light, and can understand why she took it to court for everyone instead of just seeking, reparations for herself. So a lot of those secondary sources really help you understand motivation and also the risk, that other people had been thrown off physically and gotten hurt. They had been, the guy who tried 13 years earlier, nobody tried after that because it made it worse, because once the verdict came down that it was okay to throw people off the car, then people thought, well, that's the law then, right? We can do these things. So it kind of works against all the efforts. And so it's a very big risk for her to do that. If she doesn't win, she won't be the hero, right? So there's a lot of sources there. There's a book that adults might enjoy from, it just came out recently. Well, the middle grade one is Amy Hill Harth's Streetcar to Justice, which has some more information than this book. There are some basic ones, but I think, oh gosh, I forgot. I mean, you can read about Claudette Colvin, you can read about Rosa Parks. I mean, you can read about similar figures in history. So though there isn't a lot about, oh, Jerry McAranda, sorry, that's the author of the adult book about her streetcar ride.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I also noticed that when we were going through the wonderful illustrations and sharing the book, that you had 2 pages at the end that seemed to be more of a kind of historical biography. So this is just an encouragement to say that if you pick up the book or check out the book, that there's a wonderful bibliography in the back and a chance to do more and to be inspired and maybe do a little research paper. Who knows? Maybe you can get more ways to uncover someone like Lizzie Jennings in your own communities and name a street after them.
Yeah, the back matter kind of gives a little bit of why I wrote it, what I discovered about her, some further information, and what happened afterwards. And also it has the information about the kids who fought for that street sign. So
that is so
some
cool.
Good background stuff.
Yeah, well, it's just to show that there's always more to uncover and that there are so many sources out there that, maybe people don't even know about yet. So the bibliography could expand and Lizzie's story could get even bigger.
That would be great.
Yeah. So Beth, I just want to thank you again so much for being here with us today and sharing your book and Lizzie's story and bringing attention to all that she accomplished and her courage. It was so wonderful to hear from you and about Lizzie. Again, as a New Yorker in particular, it was so great to hear about the history that happened in my own city. So again, thank you for sharing about this powerful story and how Elizabeth Lizzie Jennings fought back against injustice. And for more, please visit bethandersonwriter.com, where you'll find resource guides for teachers and more information about Beth and Lizzie. So if you enjoyed this program today, please join us on Wednesday, November 9th for another Brave Girls Virtual Storytime, where we will be joined by author Lori Walmark for a reading of her book, Codebreaker Spy Hunter, which tells the story of another Elizabeth Friedman. This event is free, but advanced registration is required, and more details and registration information can be found on womenshistory.org. So again, Beth, thank you so much for being here and sharing this inspiring story. We really appreciate it. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their Wednesday and rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.